Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. It's the Tech Report Podcast. I'm your host, Jordan Drake, joining you for yet another episode of the official podcast of the Tech Report. It's the number one place for news and reviews in the computer hardware world. I am joined by Scott Wasson, Jeff Gager, Jeffrey Kampman, and I'm not joined by Cyril Kowalski. And I feel like at the top of the show here, this is the first thing we must address. Get the emotional weight off my chest, at the very least. Scott, why don't you share the news that if you haven't heard on the site, you're just now hearing on the podcast, and we can go ahead and sort of announce.
Yeah, so here's the post actually, Jordan. Cyril, who's been with us for 9 years, has decided to move on. So we're totally boned, and I don't know what. No,
we're all riding this flaming ship into the depths.
But hey, no, it's we don't have a lot of turnover here. We tend to try to hang on to people and show them how we like to do things and give them interesting stuff to do. And Cyril's been with us for quite a while, but Jordan, are you crying? Are you gonna make it? he's not.
I'll be all right.
Put up the monkey for a second. Put up the monkey.
So
thank you.
So
Thank
okay.
you. Well, no, actually, I feel like I'm kind of in a little bit of a spiral here. I've got chips. We got some salsa. I've got some gum. Got some. Sorry, the mic here. Got some gummy bears.
Just eat your way through the grief. Just eat your way through it. That's the best thing, I think.
And you're in a bad spot when you're doing this with the gummy bears.
That seems like the right thing to do. Yeah.
Hold on a second. I had to chew.
5 seconds of chewing
I'm
starting
chewing.
now.
Mm-hmm. I was for the comedy of that whole scene, but now I actually have gummy bears in my mouth.
He's like, they're all stuck in there. And
It's way more than I was anticipating.
just, I just reach in there and clean them out,
Ugh. I was going to start swallowing them whole and just hope they make it through my trachea.
It's a dangerous game, man.
Anyway, Cyril is gone. We're very sad about it. I know I am. I think for me, it's sort of like, I was a freaking teenager when this podcast started. So much of this podcast is a big part of sort of, for me anyway, growing up a little bit. Obviously, everyone else here was a fully grown adult when the show started. But so I just remember very vividly being on the first podcast and saying Cyril in like some first podcast meeting we had. I didn't know how to pronounce Cyril. We've joked about that many times on the show. So it's just sort of funny to think about that when he was back in France, when he moved over to Canada. But we wish him luck. Well, what's he doing at this new gig besides, I'm assuming, not talking a lot there too?
It's a tech startup. They just launched their first product. I don't know very much about it. He's basically a writer for them. So
Got it.
Yeah, I honestly don't know a lot. I was like, oh, now let's talk about all the stuff that we need you to do before you leave. Like document this and explain that and get us these files. And that was my emphasis. So I need to catch up with him once he's kind of, decompressed and gotten settled in over there and see what's going on. So.
Yeah, well, we wish him the best, and I'm sure he'll. No, he's not going to be on this podcast again. He's so glad not to have to deal with this ever again. Oh, thank Jesus in heaven. Yeah, he's free and clear. That's why he left, Scott. I don't know if he told you. He told me.
The podcast.
He just couldn't.
He was like, it's really Scott. It's really Jordan. I'm sorry.
It is. It's Jordan. He's not funny.
The rest of it would have been okay, but
constant eating. So much eating on the podcast. No, this episode is called homemade rice and egg. It's a good combo. You can't go wrong. This is my secret. A little bit of rice, a little bit of egg, salt, pepper, a little bit of soy sauce. That's an Asian meal, I think, and it's great. So that's what I'm enjoying.
Where did that come from? Oh, you're eating the food while you record. Is that?
Well, at some point tonight, I might shut off my camera and just really dive into my feelings in a bottom of a plastic bowl of rice.
Ah, okay.
We'll get there. Anyway,
right.
Let's talk about the news and the stuff. Oh, I'm sorry.
We got a sponsor.
Jeff, you're right. We do have a sponsor. We'll get to that in a second as well. Jeff, you were right. I don't have a trailer to discuss, but I did buy tickets for Avengers Age of Ultron at the New York City IMAX Theater on the Upper West Side. I'm very excited. I went the particular reason I buy at that theater is because you can get pre-assigned seating. I've talked about this before, so you can pick your seats and not have to wait in line on opening crazy weekends to try and get a good seat. I literally got the 2 best seats in the entire freaking house for one of the best IMAX theaters in the country for Avengers: Age of Ultron. So very excited about that.
Is this
And
3D or?
No, I don't. Well, it might be. I don't even know how they're gonna. I don't think they do 3D at this particular theater, and it's not really even IMAX. But I was like, you know what? I can get pre-assigned seating on opening weekend for a movie I want to see with my roommate. Like, why not? Let's do it. Mandate all that stuff. So I'm very excited about that. We do have a sponsor, and I want to pull up some information about said sponsor. It's going to be MSI. And they're sponsoring, and I'm going to talk more about this on the edited version of this podcast, but we're going to do this a little bit live, and that is to say that what they are promoting is the AG270 2QC 3K. This is an all-in-one gaming PC. It's pretty badass looking.
So is it 3K? Is it 3K resolution?
It is. What is the resolution? It is a 27-inch 3K. You're right, 2560 by 1440 resolution.
Like an all-in-one desktop, like an iMac gaming 3K. That's pretty cool.
It says here in my copy I'm not allowed to say IMAX, so you just.
I ruined it. I'm sorry.
I'm kidding.
But
no, it's really cool.
I need to review that. Like, and by that I mean just have it. Play.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's got a 970M GeForce card in it. It is run by a fourth generation. It's a Core i7 processor. I guess there's a variety of processors you can have it with it. But anyway, all in one, very portable. I would imagine too for LAN parties and whatnot. Gaming PC. So very cool. More about that later in the episode. But for now, thanks to MSI for sponsoring the podcast. And I guess, now they're sponsoring this podcast, it means they're kind of sponsoring the live stream. So any anti-MSI comments will be censored in the comments. So just, keep it cool, folks. Be cool, guys. Be cool.
Jordan is going to enforce censorship from his host spot.
A little bit.
Yeah.
A little bit. All right. So let us talk about, I guess we can talk about some of the Apple stuff. And contrary to what you might suspect, not all that excited.
Really?
Jordan Drake is not. So we'll start with the watch, and then we'll get to the MacBook. And I will say for the watch, the story written here by Mr. Geoff Gager, the details of which I'm sure most of everyone already knows. We didn't learn a lot more about the watch's capabilities from an app perspective, which I think was a big disappointment and I think a big miss on Apple's part. We did, of course, learn a lot more about the pricing for these various editions of the watch, starting at, $349 for the sport version, which is sort of your gym everyday. I'm poor, so I had to pay $349 version. Not really poor, but it is the everyman's version. And then you get up to the Apple Watch.
Just plain Apple Watch.
Plain Apple Watch, right? And that's $549 and up.
$549 and up. Yeah.
And that goes all the way up to $1,000 depending which band you get. And then you get to the Apple Watch Edition, which is $15,000. Now, all the way up to I think $17,000 is the most expensive one.
Right.
It starts at 10.
It starts at
and only
10
goes
grand,
up from
yeah.
there.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, 10, but it goes up to 17 depending on which watch band you pick. And I'm happy to let everyone else chime in here, but I will just say, as the resident Apple fan, because by the way, I'm now the only one who hasn't. Once again, another reason that it's had. I'm the only one left who hasn't met. Anyway, not that he ever chimed in for any of the Mac stuff, but anyway, God. I hated that guy. Anyway,
this is the denial and this is the bargaining and all these different stages are just coming out.
Stages of grief.
Yeah, it's rough, man.
Hold on to your butts, folks. It's gonna be a crazy episode. Anyway, the point is that my take is that, okay, we saw nothing that we hadn't seen before as far as the functionality. The interface looks confusing because not only can you touch, but you can force touch, push the button on the side, and roll the knob on the top. We didn't see any really third party. We saw some third party app integration, right? You can get your airline ticket, and you can it'll check your heartbeat, and then there's what was the third party one there? You can check baseball scores because apparently people still watch baseball.
Ooh.
Sorry, I'm not a
ESPN
baseball fan.
has glanceables.
Yeah, so there was some third party, but there was no demo from some really crazy cool app that we hadn't seen before, and what the reveal was. Really these prices. Now, what I'm disappointed in is the fact that I don't feel like the interface is going to be intuitive. I'm disappointed in the fact that I didn't feel like there was a ton of functionality. It wasn't just taking everything your iPhone currently does and putting it on your wrist. What I am not disappointed in is the price of the gold watch. And this is what I find so fascinating is people, to be fair, so many people do understand this, but a lot of people seem to completely misunderstand that I think it's 1 in 8 people in New York City make more than $1 million a year. And there's 8 million people in this city. Like in just Manhattan. That's not the tri-state area. The amount of money that people have in this city, in London, in France, in Russia, in China to blow on expensive things is the reason that Rolex and Omega and Maserati and all these companies exist. So if Apple wants to go make a $15,000 watch, people will buy it.
Sure.
I guarantee you.
Oh, sure.
There's
And
no question about that. So people are like, oh, who's going to buy it? It's like a lot of people are going to want this. Are you kidding me?
well, there's a marketing function of this too, right? Say that your watch tops out at $550, $600, and you're going into a market where people are putting down a chunk of change for a Tag Heuer or whatever it is, right? You have a perception issue there because you're the bargain only
You're right.
thing.
You're
And so like not playing in the higher end of that market doesn't actually work well from a perception standpoint. I think for Apple, they need to be a status symbol like other watches are status symbols in order to like have a real chance of taking that slot from somebody who's on somebody's wrist, a rich person who is buying a status symbol. And they're not going to replace it with a $550 watch. So
Well, the other thing too is someone said, well, why wouldn't that person just go buy a Rolex? This person already has a Rolex. If you're spending $10,000 on something because you got your big $3 million bonus from your job at Morgan Stanley, you already have a Rolex at home. You have a watch keeper like Tony Stark that turns all your watches to keep the little internal mechanisms charged up. Like, this is the world that Apple's entering into, the luxury world. I mean, and like, so it's funny. I have a lot of friends who work at places like Ralph Lauren and Louis Vuitton and some other places. And these are, they charge $2,000 for an alligator skin belt, and they sell a lot of them. So the point is, there is that world, and I think that people just sort of, people go $15,000 for a watch. I never. And then there's this line about it being obsolete. Now, this is my personal theory, and I don't think it's confirmed by any rumors at all. But my thought is, if you actually drop the coin on the gold Apple Watch, I'd be willing to bet you that when they come up with a new version of the watch, even if they change some of the hardware, they might come up. I would think that Apple would be smart to, maybe they won't, a way where you can take your gold watch to them, and they'll either swap it out, melt down the gold, and use it for another watch, or they'll replace the internal components with whatever the newer internal components are, specifically for the Apple Watch edition, starting at 10 grand a piece. Just my theory. I could be wrong, but I feel like the gold in the watch is worth something. So if the hardware becomes obsolete, Apple would want to do something to keep that up. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong.
Well, Jordan, did you hear Tim Cook said there are limited quantities of the Apple Watch edition, the expensive one available? I think that type of enforced scarcity in this market is something that people do, right?
Yep.
And it's possible, just possible, that those things become collector's editions. Even if it's not the greatest, latest hardware, right? But it's weird. It's weird to meld the world of consumer electronics, where everything is like disposable and has a short life cycle and is relatively cheap, with the world of these watches where they're heirlooms and they cost tons of money compared to what the materials are worth and that kind of thing. So I'm curious to see how this plays out. But clearly they were trying to meld those two dynamics with the products, and I don't know. I wouldn't be shocked if 5-10 years from now those edition ones are in like going for more money in auctions and stuff. It could happen.
Yeah.
Well, there's something about this being the first Apple Watch too. I mean, regardless of whatever happens, if this is wildly successful, it's the first in a wildly successful product. If this is a giant flop, then this becomes one of those little Mac cubes that people collect because it was horrible. So I think if you've got a limited edition product, then yeah, I think those $10,000 watches will probably. I mean, the thing that I don't get as much is there isn't. I mean, maybe the band sets them apart visually, but for a high-end watch, the $10,000 one looks a lot like the $350 one to me. So it seemed like it's the materials are different, but if I was a watch guy, I think I would expect more differentiation, because you sort of have to know about the watch to sort of realize the differences between them, I think.
I think just visually, people are gonna be like, "Oh, is that the gold one?" I don't know. I think that. Well, let's talk. I think the MacGuffin of the gold watch is what everyone likes to talk about, and my other earlier concerns I think are certainly not I think uncommon amongst even some of the Mac fans in the sense that I'm not sure the rest of the watch is incredibly exciting.
Well, I mean, that's true because, like, no less than John Gruber of Daring Fireball said, or he looked at, he wasn't at the event surprisingly, but he looked at some of the impressions of people who did go, and they said that the interface was confusing, and he said, well, that's not good. So for someone who's so usually like cheerleady
Yes, that's
of
a really good
Apple,
point.
even he's concerned. And I mean, it does sound kind of like a little rough right now. So who knows?
Yeah.
All I can say is they've got the money and hopefully they've got the stamina to stay it through and turn this just like look, the first iPhone didn't have the App Store and people thought that was the dumbest thing and it was the dumbest thing. So maybe maybe we have a few years to work out the kinks before this is a winner and maybe it's a one-hit wonder that goes away. The one-hit not wonder.
Yeah, it doesn't have to. It's not an iPhone. It's not that revolutionary. It doesn't have to be a success, right? They have some ridiculous number of iPhone owners. I saw some stat. I don't remember the exact numbers, but they said if a very small percentage of iPhone owners bought one of these, then they would have like some ridiculous number in sales, right?
Yeah, I mean,
huge amounts.
Even if they sold a small number of these, like to a small, or just to a small percentage of iPhone owners, it would still be a multi-billion-dollar business.
Right. So
I mean,
and honestly, my problem with it is that because with the absence of apps that are exciting and sensors that are really different or better than what you get in a phone, I'm not clear on like I'm not going to buy one, and I'm not tempted to buy one, and I'm not saying it couldn't be a good thing eventually, but I'm not looking at this and saying like I need to make room in my budget for that someday. I'm not there yet.
But the other question is, guys, do you have any other smartwatch?
No, and honestly, none of them are compelling enough for me to want.
See, that's another point. Is that I also feel like it's one of those things where it's like I don't think anyone's really sold in this category.
Yeah.
Well, it has to do something.
Right.
The disappointing thing for me is there was sort of rumors at the beginning that would have all sorts of biometric functions, which is, for a wearable, if you're going to be wearing something on your body, you might want to do that instead of carrying a smartphone or in addition to if you can get extra information and extra capabilities for it to be physically attached to you. But it sounds like a bunch of the sensors that they were working on for measuring, stress levels and some other blood pressure didn't work reliably enough, so they actually nixed them from the final design. So all you have is a heart rate sensor, which is available on a whole bunch of other smartwatches and fitness bands already. So, it's sort of, I think, a lost opportunity, especially with their big health kit initiative that they've got. But it is something that could maybe improve in future versions. I think a watch can actually be compelling if you can give people interesting biometric information that you gather from their wrist.
Yeah. Jordan, let's move on and talk about the MacBook. I
had about 30 more minutes of material.
Oh, okay. I sorry.
No, I will just say one real fast thing, then we can move on. I do think that what I had understood is that Apple originally wanted to do a bunch of different, like, measuring your sweat for sugar,
blood sugar,
all that stuff. And the problem, I think, it was just they can't make consistent contact with your skin, and so that just became an issue. So that was what I had heard.
Like the other thing they ran into with that, I think, was if you're going to make a device like that, it has to be approved by the FDA, or at least that was my impression, and that was going to be another major obstacle.
Right.
So.
No, absolutely. So a lot of interesting things behind the scenes, I'm sure. But we'll see how they. I think the true test will be how they go moving forward, regardless of whether or not it's a hit or not, and what they can do to either make it a hit or move on. But we'll see. Yeah. But let's talk very quickly about this ultra thin MacBook. It certainly, I don't think anything crazy revolutionary, but it has a few interesting things that I think are telling for the industry, most notably USB-C. But Jeffrey Campman, tell us about it.
Okay, so Apple was already well known for the MacBook Air, which it's the super thin, super light notebook, but they found ways to make it thinner. And they reintroduced this thing as just like the regular MacBook with no suffix. Like a while back, like around 2004, 2006, there was a white MacBook and a black MacBook, and they were plastic, and they were
Right.
midline things. And now, so I mean, this isn't in that same position, though, I don't think. So this thing is only 13.1 millimeters thick. That's 25% thinner than the current Air, which is, again, that's already super impressive.
Yeah.
Just from a thinness engineering perspective, I guess. And it only weighs 2 pounds. And how they got there was they miniaturized a whole bunch of things. They miniaturized the motherboard. They made it like 67% smaller than the motherboard in the existing MacBook Air. They made the keyboard a lot thinner. They introduced a new switch mechanism that allowed them to make a thinner keyboard. And they also did away with the mechanical touchpad. So now the touchpad in the MacBook Air is like this force feedback haptic kind of thing. It seems like it's based on some of the technology in the Apple Watch.
Right.
So it does artificial clicks, and it's also pressure sensitive too, but we'll get to that in a minute. And so maybe the biggest thing for people who were clamoring for a Retina display in the MacBook Air for the longest time, they finally put a Retina display in a notebook of this size. So it's a it's just 12-inch display, and it's 2,304 by 1440.
Right.
So, and it's less. I think they said the display assembly is less than a millimeter thick, which is just nuts. But
apparently it's almost a little bit creepy to hold because you don't feel like you're holding anything. It just doesn't.
It's 2 pounds.
2 pounds.
2 pounds.
And the what they did was they used a Broadwell chip, which is the 5th generation Intel Core 14.
Core M specifically.
Right. Which is and it's like a 5-watt chip, so it's fanless. So one reason it can be really thin is they don't have to have active cooling, and so then they have this little teeny motherboard, and the rest of the internal space is battery. And they use these new batteries that are layered.
They can make terraced batteries now, so they could fit more battery into the same space, I think.
Yeah, and so they've got basically not much else inside of the thing based on their diagrams than just a lot of battery. And when I first saw this as being introduced, I was thinking, oh no, battery life, and then they get to this part and they're saying 9 to 10 hours.
Yeah.
Which at that point then I'm no longer objecting. I was worried because honestly I don't care if it's any thinner than the last MacBook Air, or maybe even thicker than that is okay. Weight matters to me, but not thickness, right?
Right.
But they seem to have put the right combination of things in it to where it's hard to object, right? Maybe even thicker with more battery life would be better, right, Geoff? Right?
I have an
Or
Air
other ports.
They got one. It's weird because they got one USB-C port, and it's this ultra great port because it does all your charging, USB, display port, everything. But you got one output, and you're gonna have to split off of that and use dongles and stuff to do everything. So I haven't got a clear sense of if I decide I want to dock this, and I want to have a display off of it and say a SD card reader and charge and several external hard drive, how does that look? Does it really work with just one port? And to some extent, I think they're going to try to get around that with, you put your storage on Wi-Fi, or you put it on Bluetooth, or they're trying to do that. And the whole super wireless thing is, I think Intel's going to push on that in the Skylake generation. I think we'll see this in PC laptops too going forward. But it's still a little bit hard to say one port is okay and I'm reconciled to that,
Yeah, it's an interesting object, and Geoff, we'll let you go here in a second, but I think that I'm a little confused about how you're able to charge it and run a USB drive off at the same time. What I will say is that the general consensus I've seen certainly seems to be that USB-C is a very compelling standard. It can provide power to mobile devices. It can provide both video and data transfer. It's a 10 gigabytes per second. So it's gigabits. So it's extraordinarily high speed. So there is certainly, and it's reversible. It doesn't have the MagSafe features that I think people enjoy, but it's an interesting approach.
Right. I think this laptop tops out at 5 gigabits. I read that somewhere, that it's not actually full USB 3.
Okay.
speed.
Well, either way,
But I mean, that's
wait. And so it's slower than USB 3?
No.
Well, there's USB 3 and there's USB 3.1.
which is
Okay.
faster.
Yeah, the USB 3.1 is faster, but Type-C ports can be used with the 3.0 and 3.1 standards, as I found out today. So
You're just doing all the research.
He's writing news and getting abused by an
up,
editor,
yeah,
or by a gerbil, by a commenter. Yeah. So anyway, but Jordan,
Excuse me. I just think you should be aware that it's actually only 5 gigabytes per second. So I don't know who you think you are, Mr. Cameron, but like you need to get your like. I'm just so offended you wouldn't know that. Like, don't
I'm
you
gonna
know?
imagine all future comments in that voice, and
That's
it will
exactly
please
the
me
right
immensely.
Scott, you're a keyboard snob. What is? I mean, you haven't obviously played with it yet, but what's your reaction to this butterfly design?
So the butterfly mech is an evolution of the scissor style mechanism, which Apple is comparing to and saying, "Oh, the scissor mechanism isn't great," and etc. You know what? I think most laptops now, they just switch to rubber domes. They don't even use the scissors to like give a little bit of snap to the key when it goes down. And so Apple's comparing to their old MacBooks really more than they are to like the average laptop there. And the old MacBooks had a better keyboard than the average laptop. The butterfly mechanism is neat because if it works like they say, then scissor switches they rock a little bit side to side. They're not quite as stable as they should be. And I think the other reason they changed the design, if you look at it, is it so it can be thinner.
Yeah.
And so I like the extra stability. I hope that it has a good snap to it when it goes down. It looks like it's based on this tension of this plastic thing here that's going to like give when it goes. And I really don't know how that's going to feel. The other thing is I think there'll be less travel.
Yeah, that
Very
was one of
likely.
the complaints that people had, was that this new keyboard, they said it feels really weird to type on because the travel is so short.
Yeah. And Chuck Hill in the comments says, didn't Synaptics have a switch design that pushed on the diagonal to give the illusion of longer key travel? Yes, they did. This is different than that, but it's weird how much Synaptics between their force pad that they demoed to us and that keyboard, and Geoff, you visited them and wrote that up. It's weird how much that type of stuff wound up in this before like Synaptics stuff wound up in PC laptops. I bet if you're Synaptics now, you can go to the PC guys and be like, "Hey, you should buy our stuff because you got to compete with them, right?"
Yeah, and the force pad stuff is actually pretty cool. I mean, Synaptics was demoing that in 2012, I think. And it's really it's kind of weird to see feedback when you push down harder and it just tracks perfectly with it. And given the sort of limitations of using a touchpad, having that force sensitivity is really neat. And it was supposed to be included, I think, in the Broadwell reference design that Intel came up with, but I don't know if that ever actually happened. But I imagine that, Synaptics is probably getting some calls now. They also have a really neat keyboard technology where it's actually magnetic that allows them to they use magnetic resistance. So I don't know if we'll see that in slimmer designs, but this is kind of a case where, forget about it, they may not have sacrificed thickness for battery life, and the battery life may be good enough, but if you're compromising the keyboard again to do it, and this isn't even the thinnest Core M system around, like you've got Asus's, I think it's the
ZenBook
UX305,
UX305, yeah,
which is thinner, available with a higher resolution screen, has 3 USB ports and an SD reader. It's one of those, they won't sell nearly as well as a Mac will, but it's kind of interesting that they set out to do a
What's
really,
the
really
battery
thin
life
design
on that,
and
do you
didn't
know?
even come up with the thinnest. Oh, I'm sure it's not anywhere close to the.
because I'm just trying to figure out
MacBook.
what the compromise is, because that seems like so many. That seems like so much more, but it's unclear to me exactly how they pulled that off.
It's saying it's
But
got
anyway.
a 45 watt hour battery, which is, it's a Core M too, so a lot of your savings are coming from the processor. But sort
Right,
of depending on the screen that you've got, it's this also looks like it maybe has a more uniform thickness over the whole. It's not as much of a wedge shape as the
Right.
MacBook is, but just the fact that they were able to squeeze a reasonable number of ports. It's got a mini HDMI port in it in a thinner package kind of highlights the design decisions that Apple continues to make.
Yeah.
Yeah, I gotta say though, I got a 5-year-old laptop and I'm thinking about getting a new one, and I look at this and think it would be nice. I mean, super light, you take it to stuff to, press events
Do
and
you
stuff.
need
And
it to be lighter? Like the difference between 2 pounds and 2.5 pounds?
do I want it to be lighter is a different question, right? You wind up carrying a lot of junk on your back, going through trade shows, and you collect stuff in your bag through the day because people are like, here's a Titan X, and then you're like,
That
oh, I
stuff
gotta carry a
weighs
Titan
more
X.
than this stuff.
I know, but I mean, like everything matters. Every little bit counts, right? I kind of have tried to ditch the DSLR to trade shows and just use my phone, and like, it's really nice not to have to carry that around, right? And so I have no.
What Scott is trying to say is he's old.
I am.
And old
I'm old
people
and
don't like
frail.
carrying
I just
things.
can't. But no, I mean, look, I get a 3-pound laptop now, and it's fine.
Yeah.
But I do like the idea of a computing device. This elegant that does everything I want and is an upgrade in every way from what I have now. Which, frankly, like laptops haven't really been in a good place, especially PC laptops, for a while, and they're getting there. So, Jordan, I've been looking at the Dell XPS 13 as an interesting thing. I don't know if you've seen it, but it has
I
this
saw people talking
screen that
about
goes
it, yeah.
all the way to the edges. It's got a nice Ultrabook form factor. It's got a really big touchpad, a decent keyboard that's backlit. Like, Dell really seemed to have hit it out of the park with that. And I was thinking maybe I'll just get one of those because I've really found that my old laptop is now an issue. Like, I'm not doing as much work on the road as I would because I'm kind of like, oh, I don't want to do that. Like, that's so. It's probably time for a new one. And I looked at the price on this MacBook when they announced it, and I was like, it's like what, $13.99 starting? They're $12.99. $12.99, so $1,300. And
I can get you a deal. I can get you like $50 off.
and it's like, it's got good spec for the starting thing. I don't need to upgrade from there. 8 gigs of RAM, like it's done, right? You could pay the entry price,
256 memory.
and you're 256 gig SSD. Like I'm good, I'm done. But I went and looked at the Dell, and you start going through their little config menu. It starts out way cheaper than this, and when you get done, and you're like, oh, but I want the good display. That's like, bang! It's like $100 less than this for the Dell with the same
Interesting.
spec.
When you finally get it to where it's sort of
Yeah.
equivocal.
Did you also add the
That's very
$80
interesting.
dongle to the MacBook, though?
No, but I mean, the way I use my laptop now, the only thing I don't even know if I need anything actually for what I normally do. Like, I don't even, maybe an SD card reader, but I could just plug my camera in. So,
Well, you still need an adapter for the Type-C.
With the $80 dongle. Yeah, no, it's great.
for the type, I guess you need a USB type. But I any laptop that I buy now, I want Type-C on it. Like, I'd rather pay for the adapter and get Type-C. One of the disadvantages of the Dell is that it is not Type-C, and so eventually I need adapters going the other way. So I would prefer that. So I'm actually looking at this as like, that's an interesting option. And Jordan, I figure somebody needs to buy a Mac on the staff who isn't you, right?
I honestly, I feel that way. I'd say a couple of things, then we can move on. The first is that, remember when the Air first came out, it was priced higher than most other things and was considered to be the sort of luxury accessory that would be bought. People were saying at the time, maybe it was just me, executives getting onto Learjets would be carrying the MacBook Air.
Right.
Not very fast, but super thin and super sexy and super statement, fashion statement. Now I think it's kind of replaced the MacBook as like the go-to Apple computer. I see so many of them around in the coffee shops and various places, the bar crawls and the pool halls and the down low places that I visit. And but I mean, so I have a MacBook Air for my most recent job. I was given a MacBook Air as part of my job, and I love it. I mean, I take it to trade shows. I bring it home with me. For the most part, it stays at the office, but it is super light, and it really does its job well. And then when I'm at the office, I plug it into a larger monitor, so I get the the larger resolution. Anyway, the point is the MacBook Air went from this sort of exclusive item to something that it starts a little around 1,000 depending on which size you get, but has become sort of accepted as a great entry level mobile Mac. So this is clearly trying to be a little more of that premium item that's not quite like MacBook Air with Retina. They felt like they needed to make something that's a little more distinctive, so they decided let's redesign this whole thing around a much thinner body. It's not longer battery life, it's comparable battery life. So I think this is sort of back to like the product you take on the Learjet. Not that it's completely out of reach. To your point, Scott, it's comparable price-wise with other devices, but just that it comes in gold. It's going to look super distinctive, and it's going to be that sort of statement. It's like I have the lightest laptop out there, or at least one of them, and it's got Type C, which is going to be sort of the newest and the most leading edge. So I think it's sort of that story continues to play through here, and I can see why it's of interest to you.
Yeah, and I'm gonna get what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take 10 grand and not buy the Apple Watch. I'm gonna buy 7.14 MacBooks, and
Nice.
I can just strap one on my wrist, and I'm sure you can get the time on it. So
Yeah.
it's light enough. I figure 2 pounds. Like you can put that on your wrist and.
Yeah.
Just make sure you get the gold one for that.
That's right. Yeah, you gotta get. Well, I'm gonna get one of each, right? Because it's 7.14 of them for the same price as the watch. So,
Scott, I appreciate you trying, but the comedy on this podcast is kind of my thing.
oh, I'm sorry.
So if you could just
That explains it.
I love that you try. I love that you tried. I do. I love it. You're so enthusiastic, but if you just kind of just back off. All right, let's talk about GDC. Scott, you had a chance to I guess, were you in the crowd when Mr. Jensen Huang introduced the latest Shield device from Nvidia?
I was, and I think we all saw this coming from like a million miles out.
Mm-hmm.
Geoff Prime, I don't friggin' know, Geoff. So you played with the Shield tablet. Did you play with the Shield Portable or just a tablet?
No, just the portable.
It's
Or just the tablet.
Okay.
Sorry. Yeah.
I had the portable, which is the little handheld thing. I had the tablet. I've played with the game stream stuff and the grid sort of Netflix for games that they have. You hooked it up to my TV, done all that stuff. They've been building for a while to we're going to take a Tegra-based setup. We're going to put it or Tegra-based system. We're going to put it in an enclosure. You connect to your TV. Jordan, it's a lot like an Apple TV, but then it has gaming chops. And so the idea is it runs Android. It comes with a single game controller, and the game controller is a great thing because it lets you play games, but it also acts as the remote for it, right? And it runs Android TV, which is an interface built explicitly around 10-foot like couch-based interaction stuff. And so they're Netflix apps, they're all those things. Plus, they have the ability to stream games from your PC, the ability to play native Shield optimized Android games, like built for their it's a Tegra X1 mobile SoC from Nvidia. So they've got that, and then they have this grid service which does remote game streaming, where they're gonna like you can subscribe for whatever bucks per month they're gonna charge, and then you get access to these PC games that run on a remote server, and then the video streams to you and you interact and play. And for some genres of games, like that's fast enough to work well, right? Not for everything, and it does kind of depend on where the data center is and how fast your internet connection is and things like that. But this is like their move into the living room, which is interesting because the living room is where things go to die, right? Windows Media Center PCs, like I think they're still trying on Steam machines, and we're going to talk about that, but so far nothing. Apple TV is like kind of like, we'll put that there and then we'll abuse and neglect it. Like a lot of stuff has gone into the living room and not been able to put a dent in really Xbox and PlayStation, which is the things that really win in the living room.
Yeah.
So this is their attempt. The strange thing to me is that it's $200.
Yep.
Does it seem high or low to you?
It seems really high because like it is a high spec mobile SoC, right? The Tegra X1 is the latest thing based on Maxwell. They have an expensive game controller. It costs $60 if you buy the controller alone, and I see why they ship with one. Like I get that. Like it makes sense. But like I think if they can do game stream from your PC, Android games at a reasonable resolution and performance, all the Netflix streaming, all the Amazon streaming, all of that stuff, and their grid service stuff, they could do all of that on a lower spec SoC than their latest Tegra X1. Because Jeff, you did it on the Shield tablet with Tegra K1.
Yep.
No problem, right? I used it on the older Tegra on the Shield Portable. No problem. Most of these things do not depend on the SoC having tons of graphics oomph. Only the specifically optimized Android games that run locally require that. And it's weird. It's weird to me that they're leading with something expensive, because they could have led with something that was like $79, and then you buy the controller, or it comes with a cheaper controller, maybe that's not super deluxe, and like gotten into a lot of living rooms. This is a big ask. It feels like you're getting really close to a PlayStation or a Xbox to me. So
Well, and part of it is that you're playing native games, because last week also Valve announced its $50 Steam Link, which is kind of a Chromecast for Steam streaming that doesn't come with a controller, but it's only $100 with the Steam controller included, and that's coming out in November. So if you're just interested in streaming PC games and don't want to limit yourself to a GeForce graphics card, which Game Stream requires, Valve is going to have this sort of cheap dongle device that I don't know what kind of sort of native media capabilities it will have, if it will have any. But it wouldn't surprise me if they had some sort of basic media playback, either if it's streamed from your PC or just doing it natively because they've got a cheap SoC in there. But like you're really paying that extra money for the native Android games, which if you're also going to be streaming, you would presumably also have on your PC and be able to play that way. So it seems like the value proposition seems to be hinging on this native experience that's kind of a weird in-between between a full-fat console and sort of a cheaper Android device.
yeah, and I guess it should be said that they're not that far from the full fat consoles with the Tegra X1. I mean, it's
Well,
not
they
as,
say it's twice as powerful as an Xbox 360. They
Right.
actually haven't made any comparisons to the Xbox One or the PS4.
right, and those are more powerful, but this is pretty beefy hardware in its way, and they do have a bunch of like natively optimized games, Jordan, and they had people from like, of course it was GDC, so everybody's there already. So they have people from like Epic and id Software and Gearbox Software, and they announced like Doom BFG Edition and Borderlands the pre-sequel, and a number of things were being ported natively to the Shield box. But it was a little weird because it was like they brought out all their like old school PC game developer friends, and we're talking about couch-based gaming. And to me, couch-based gaming succeeds when you go to the genres that Nintendo dominates. Like, those are the things that work well. Platformers, racing games, things like that work well on a couch, in a communal setting, that kind of thing. The demos that they showed of people, like, playing the games on the little controller with the Shield that were first-person shooters, like, the people were, like, clumsy, like, they were aiming around wrong and stuff, because they're not any good playing with the controller. It was hilarious to see, because I mean that's what happens when I try to play a first-person shooter on one of those. I know they sold like gazillions of Calls of Duty on the Xbox, but it's still like not a native experience for a lot of people who are Nvidia's like audience, So I don't know. It sounds it's interesting that they're finally there. We expected them to go there. We need to get hands-on with one and play with it. It's just maybe really ambitious, which isn't necessarily bad, but it's a lot of money to ask. So that's my take.
All right, the battle for the living, the battle for the. Oh, I screwed that up. Anyway, it's supposed to be the battle for the living room continues, but I messed that up. Let's talk about Zotac's console killer Steam Machine. Is the Steam Machine still alive and well?
Yeah, it's alive.
I don't know if it's been well, but it's alive.
Yeah, and I got to go look at this. They announced this thing along with like Valve had like 14 partners who announced Steam machines. And the thing is, they've announced them in the past, and then they like shipped them with Windows. And the latest, like I was talking to the folks at Zotac, and they're like, "Yeah, we're ready to ship." But it's based on Skylake, which is Intel's processor that comes out mid-year. So they knew that Valve wasn't going to have it out until then, right? And then it was like the PR person's like, yes, Valve's latest schedule is November 14th. And the engineer guy is like, really? again? Like they keep delaying this. Like it just keeps happening. And I think now they're just hoping to get like right before Christmas they're going to ship these things. But there are tons of Steam machines that have been announced. It's like as many shapes and sizes as there are PCs. Zotac's one is interesting because it's kind of console sized and console shaped. But it's high-end hardware. It has a Skylake processor, which is a next-gen thing. It's a socketed one that's like a 35-watt CPU. And then it has a GeForce GTX 970M, which is a relatively beefy mobile processor. It's all sort of built into this little box. And I haven't got like all the specs at my command. I think we have a story there. But basically, it's pretty high spec in terms of the memory and the storage and et cetera, et cetera. And they're charging like $1,000 for this thing. So, speaking of paying a lot of money for something in the living room, wow, now this is going to blow away an Xbox or a PlayStation. I mean, this is way more powered than that. But you're paying a lot of money to get into it. So it may not be like the Steam machine that's the one that like really goes into the living room and cleans up if there is one. But it's a cool option. I mean, and it's certainly like you put that there and you have the best, or at least the best in a reasonable size for the living room that I've seen. And talking to them about it, they've been building these Z-boxes forever, and they are confident it will be quiet even though it runs in this little enclosure. So I think it's going to be kind of an aspirational Steam machine as these things go.
See, the problem for me is for $1,000, you can take like the Cooler Master Elite 110 case I reviewed a while back, just that little like lunchbox-sized ITX case. You can put a GTX 970 in it, and just like a Core i5 or Core i3 dual-core processor, and you've already got more power than you'll ever need for the living room.
Baby,
So
you
it's really
going. Just keep going. It was a joke.
Sorry.
Keep going.
Yeah. So I mean, it's just weird. Looking at this thing, like you're paying so much money for that, like pancake or pizza box form factor, and for me, that's just like, I can take it or leave it. But
yeah,
I don't get the functional benefit for this. Like, I can understand people who want a thinner laptop because they're picking it up, they're carrying it around, they have it on their lap. But if you look at the size of people's televisions and the furniture that they usually have under them to store their, the set-top box for their cable company or whatever, like a mini ITX system or like some of the slim desktop-style PC cases that exist are a lot larger than this Zotac system, fit right in that environment. So I don't really get why, if you're having a little NUC system for a home theater PC and you're not playing games or only playing really basic stuff, then something like that makes perfect sense. But if you're trying to build a hardcore gaming system, it just seems like putting it in an arbitrarily small form factor when there's no need to is just kind of a bad decision.
Geoff, what they told me is that the idea was, I think, like a lot of TVs, you get a big TV, it comes on a stand, and that stand lifts the TV up so high, you could set this next to the stand under the TV itself, and it would sit in that gap. I think that's literally the design idea here. So it's an extremely specific thing that they were going for. So love it or hate it, I think there's a reason for it to be that size.
It's cool that we can fit a PC this powerful into a box that size. I mean, I felt that way about that little gigabyte box that we got a while back.
The bricks.
The bricks, but I'm not like $999 excited about it.
All right. Well, this is also probably not for somebody who can build their own PC.
Yeah. That's also true.
Right. I think that's part of what we're looking at here. But it's an interesting option, and I saw it and I'm like, hey guys, here's what you need to do. You need to build a whole line of PCs where like you have SODIMMs and the M.2 connectors and all that stuff. Expose everything that you can, like a slot for every laptop style like upgradable thing, and then make the CPU socketed and just let us build whatever we want inside of it, because there's no reason why. Like the Intel kind of tried that with the NUC, but then you can't even put graphics in it. This has an MXM slot, so you could put in whatever graphics you want. Well, there's some issues with the cooling on this particular one, whether every MXM module would fit, but it would be nice if there was a really small like build a PC standard based on, because the components exist, right? You can put everything in a laptop, and as long as you go with the socketed CPU, which will be a little different than a laptop, but there are low power ones available. Then you have a completely upgradable modular PC that you could fit into something this size, and there's room literally in this size for expandability of every type. So I'm hoping they do that. Like, that's what I want to see. Anyway, this comes with, I think, one Steam controller and a pre-installed OS for that price too. So it's clearly like for people who don't want to do their own work on that front.
And that's the formula with all the Steam boxes, I think, is they're just going to come with Steam OS pre-installed and a Steam controller, and then you can buy another controller for $50. Valve announced. So, I mean, that's console-like, I guess.
Yeah. We should move on. Let's talk about. I got one more GDC thing, and then I want to talk to Geoff about his awesome latest thing. So this is like, we literally put my tweets in a news thing, because I went to this this session on the next generation of OpenGL. Now, OpenGL is a graphics programming standard that's like not Direct 3D, right? So if you're not building games for Windows, even if you are building games for Windows, but you want to build for cross-platform stuff, this is what you build. And I was going to do a live blog, and then I just failed to get it ready, and so I just tweeted all this stuff, and they stuck it in a news post. So that's what we have. But this was the unveiling, basically, of the next generation OpenGL. Everybody's doing new graphics APIs. AMD came out with Mantle, which is just for Radeons, over a year ago, and then everybody kind of looked at that and said, "Oh yeah, like we should fix this. Like we'll all do one." And so Apple did Metal, which was its low-level API, and Microsoft announced DirectX 12, Direct3D 12, and the OpenGL guys at the Kronos Group said they're going to do what they call GL Next, and GL Next turned out to be something they now have an official name for, called Vulcan. And this was an interesting presentation of a new API, because instead of it being like announcers from Intel and Nvidia and AMD and etc., it was just like the game developers. Johan Anderson from DICE, who's been involved with AMD in making Mantle and some of those things, and a number of other game developers from Valve and Epic and places like that, got up and gave a presentation about this. And you know what this is AMD handed Mantle, its low-level API for Radeons, to the Kronos Group. And the Kronos Group, all the developers and the various other hardware vendors got together, put their heads together, and adapted it to work on any hardware, basically. So there are a number of adjustments that they kind of had to make sure different types of GPUs that execute things differently would be able to be compatible with this. But this is Mantle for the wider world. And as this was announced, I guess, or even before, AMD's graphics CTO did a blog post where he talked about the future of Mantle. And it was a little cryptic, but basically what he was saying is, like, this is kind of sunset for Mantle for the most part. They're going to use it internally. I think they'll develop like middleware on it and new technology stuff like prototyping. But Vulcan becomes like the thing for cross-platform low-level graphics. And if you look at the article here, there's some tweets about it. It's like super nerdy stuff about how it all works. But what it comes down to that's really interesting is when you're writing a program now for graphics, like it used to be with OpenGL, Direct3D, whatever it was, you would kind of like describe like, hey, draw this stuff on the screen. I want some polygons here, and like stuff would happen you didn't understand, and then like a picture comes out the other end. Now this is really lower level. This is kind of like, hey, GPU, like allocate memory here and run this shader, execute these commands, and like then a drawing happens if you did it right. But you're telling the GPU what to do much more explicitly, and the expectation is that it will do the things that you told it to do in that order, instead of like just kind of going off and drawing. So I think that this means that you get Well, we know it means you get way lower CPU utilization. You make it a little bit faster graphics execution. Those are the big things. So the CPU use in current APIs is kind of a mess, and I think this really solves that. But it also means that complexity for developing graphics applications moves into the application and out of the graphics drivers, which, as if you've been living the dream with PC gaming, you've known that graphics drivers are a huge issue, that are a huge part of like owning a PC, is constantly updating them for the latest games. I think a lot of that complexity goes away, and really what you have is the game developers have the control, but they have to manage that complexity themselves. They allocate memory themselves, they deallocate it, they can break things that they couldn't break before because they didn't have control. But it's just a new world, and so I think things like the game engines become more important here, because a lot of people are not going to want to mess around with developing in the low-level graphics API if they're not like super graphics nerds. But probably we get more goodness overall. And this is not really related, but I should say the other thing that happened at GDC, guys, did you cover the Source Engine thing? No, I don't think we did. So we did the Unreal Engine went free. So you don't have to pay to get Unreal Engine now to develop. It used to be like $19 a month, which was cheaper than it used to be. But you can just go download it and start making a game. You have to pay 5% of your royalties over like $3,000 when you start selling the game, but anybody who wants to can get it and use it. As part of that, Nvidia PhysX, which is the physics engine in Unreal Engine, went open source or free source, or however you want to put it, so you can download and see the physics code. The joke there is maybe somebody will compile it now to like use SSE instead of x87 floating point, because they've had some problems in the past with not really being well optimized. And then Unreal Engine did that. Unity 5 was announced. Unity is kind of the big game engine the indie developers are using that forced, I think, Unreal Engine to go free. And then Valve announced Source 2 Engine, which is the follow-up to the engine they've been using for a number of years, and it's also free. So there are, I think, going to be a lot of options for developing games, and maybe not in this generation, but probably like in the next. And it'll start sooner than like a complete new rejiggering of these engines, but these games are going to be interfacing with these low-level, or these game engines are going to be interfacing with these low-level APIs, and I think that's going to be like the future of development for graphics. So everything changed last week at GDC, and Vulcan was part of it. I also went to some Direct 3D 12 sessions. All the big vendors are, Intel was talking about it, AMD's talking about it, Nvidia's talking about it. That's happening with Microsoft. It's very similar in the way you use it to Vulcan. Jordan, there's a guy from Oxide Games. I'm not sure all the games they make, but they do, I think, some RTS stuff. And he was demoing the Vulcan API. And he actually had working code because he had worked with Mantle, and he showed like much lower CPU utilization. And he had this slide that he presented, and it was like black background with white lines on it, and it had all these different like threads. And the point was that you could use like 8 threads on an 8-core CPU, and you'd use all of the threads effectively and get good results out of it, right? And that's something you haven't been able to do with past APIs. Like they kind of just wind up being gated by 1 or 2 threads. But this, now you can dispatch more work to a GPU with multiple threads. And so he gave that, and then I left that presentation and went to another one that was from AMD on DirectX 12. The guy from Oxide shows up to talk about DirectX 12 instead of Vulcan, and he has the same slide, except for it's like a white background with like a black lines, and where it said Vulcan on the other one in each of the threads, it now said Direct 3D 12. And it was the same game, it was the same model. So you get an idea that like they're all about kind of the same, and they're about kind of allowing the developer to program the GPU according to how a modern GPU now operates. But it was just hilarious to see like that he used the same slide for both of them, and it was relevant, in both cases.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense.
Should we should
Excellent.
take some questions from the chat, shouldn't we?
Yeah, I guess we should. Let's see.
I'd like to
I'd
hear
like to hear some. Oh, wow.
Oh, by
Trying
all
to do
means,
my job.
Jordan.
Or what's?
By all means, sorry.
Look, I get the serial left. I don't know
I
if
just
you're trying to clean house or if you're trying to get out. I'm like,
sometimes my
what's the deal?
lips move when I read. I'm sorry. It's just a thing. I'll be quiet.
I'm in a very fragile emotional state. I'd like to hear some discussion about Xeon D. It seems the perfect processor between socket 1150 and 2011/2013 right now. You get the core count and the optional DDR4 from socket 2011-3 while having the power consumption and pricing similar to a socket 1150. PCI Express lane count falls between the two platforms, but it has dual 10 gigabit Ethernet controllers to make up for it. The only downside is that the CPU is soldered onto the motherboard. I'd love to see a company like Asus make a Xeon D board targeted towards consumers. Scott, we're talking about some server processors here for the consumer market, are we not?
Yeah, I wrote about them this week, and I guess now I got to talk about them now instead of later in the podcast. But
That's fair.
We totally have this on the agenda. This is interesting because I think it's the end of two-socket servers as the dominant form factor in most data centers, and that's been the dominant thing for like since I started working with servers.
Yeah, long time.
long ago. But this is a chip with 8 cores. It's Broadwell cores, 14 nanometer, latest Intel tech. It has a ton of stuff integrated on the chip, like the PCI Express lanes, like the memory controller, but also the 10 gigabit Ethernet. And then it has, like on a companion chip on the same package, it has the South Bridge with the USB and SATA I/O. And so what you get is in a really small footprint, you get an entire server compute node, right? So, wow, Geoff, I don't know. Anyway, is that funny?
No, someone's accusing me of drinking in the chat.
Oh, well, are you drinking in the chat?
He is.
Okay. Well,
um,
that's way more interesting than
sorry.
Xeon D. No, I mean, really. No.
It's a Sprite Zero.
Okay.
Trust me.
You're off to a good start, new guy. All right, Scott, go ahead.
No, anyway, this is like, I expect, Jordan, that like going forward in a year or two, the Tech Report would be hosted on one of these. We get our server servers now from Linode. It's for VMs, virtual machines, that are on 2P Xeons, like 2-socket Xeons. I expect they'll go to this because it's 8 cores and 16 threads in one little footprint setup, and it's like low power. I think they top out at 45 watts, and really, here we're getting the Sprite Zero. Really, 45 watts is like the more optimal operating point for 14 nanometer Intel chip than the higher end Xeons that have bigger power envelopes. And I think that's fast enough for, like, if you're Facebook, if you're Google, if you're a web host, if you're doing caching for the web, anything like that, this is your chip now. And so it looks pretty compelling. I didn't get one to test yet. I don't know that I'll have time to do that. But this is pretty... I just think once the market understands what this is, this will be the Xeon that people buy. There are some exceptions like high-performance computing and big data mining stuff where maybe you really want like big memory machines like the 2-socket things. But one of these I think can have up to 128 gigs of memory in it. So for most stuff, this is going to be all you want. And really, this looks... Geoff, this maybe is like a better like workstation desktop chip than a lot of things. It doesn't really have the clock speed to be super exciting, but it's what, like 2.4, 2 point something gigahertz base, and then it goes up from there. 2.5, 2.6 gigahertz peaks. So probably not quite what you want for that, but
You can make an interesting like micro ATX system with one of these, though. You know,
Yeah.
you've got enough PCI Express lanes to do one graphics card and, you know, maybe a decent size SSD. it would be a kind of a. I don't think it'll actually happen, but it would be kind of a cool. If they just wanted to make a heavyweight NUC, maybe.
Yeah.
Use one of these.
Yeah, it really and workstations, desktop like style corporate workstations that people use for like AutoCAD and stuff are traditionally 2 sockets as well. And like no, like stop. like I don't think you need that anymore with the amount of memory and the amount of threads and cores and the amount of I/O that you can get on one of these. Although like single socket Haswell E stuff is out there too, so I don't know if they want to step on the feet of that. But I don't know. This is really, Jordan, this is kind of funny because it was kind of a quiet thing that Intel did, and I think the reason that they went ahead with this is the first 14 nanometer Xeon. It's an all new chip in a new segment. I think the reason they went ahead with this is they want to head off ARM based server chips at the pass. And I think the problem that the ARM guys have now is that Intel was like not joking around. I think this changes the market for Xeon for them in a dramatic way, but it positions them way better to compete with the ARM guys who were going to come in and compete on cost and power. And now they have to do that against this thing, which is kind of a killer. So that's my take without having tested it, but it just looks like it has all the right pieces.
And it also, interestingly, has this dual mode memory controller that can do DDR3 or DDR4 memory, which probably tells us a little bit about what Intel's next-gen desktop processor may have in the memory department.
Yeah.
It seems kind of likely that they would do a split configuration to take advantage of the availability of DDR3 and the lower prices, but also have the option of doing faster DDR4.
And we now know they have that already baked, right?
Yeah.
And they shipped it in 14 nanometer. So, yeah, there you go. Do you have
Excellent.
other
Let's see what else we have here from the questions. Subjectively, what is the best VR solution being shown off thus far?
I did not get to see the Sony Morpheus and the Valve HTC Vive because, like, they were just booked wall to wall. The folks at Zotac actually met me in the Valve booth, and they're like, "Hey, like, let our friend Scott in to see your thing." And Valve was like, "I would, but every appointment is booked to the end of the show. You can come to our office in Seattle," but it was completely booked. What I did see, Jordan, was the Oculus Crescent Bay, which is the latest prototype that they have that has better optics. I think maybe an upgraded display, but I'm not sure. It may just be the optics. Anyway, it's higher res effectively, and it's super light on your head, and it's just they got to be close to shipping something because it is quite good. And I got to see 3 demos. Most of them, I think they're all on the Nvidia Titan X chip, which was the new big GPU that Nvidia announced at GDC that I now have to review. They're officially launching it on the 17th. But Titan X was attached to the Crescent Bay, and it was like all this goodness was coming together. And they had a few things that were interesting about it, in addition to just like, okay, this is way lighter and better. Oh, they had audio integrated to the headset, so you don't have to wear a separate audio thing. And then they have like a strap-on barf bag that you just put right at their hooks, and you just put it right. Not really. Not really. But I thought that would be cool. Like, I'm going to do... somebody in the comments has said you need to kickstart like a nausea relief bag for the...
Excellent.
But no, it is better. What was interesting was the demos I saw told the story of the content that they are coming up with for them too. So the first one was Nvidia on the Titan X was showing a thing called Time Warp. Have you heard of this? It's Carmack's Time Warp. It's an Oculus thing, like John Carmack kind of came up with. That the graphics guys, AMD's got a version of it too. They're putting it into their drivers. The idea with it is if you don't have a frame ready to display quickly enough to update the screen when it needs to be updated for like a 90 hertz steady refresh, right? 90 cycles a second, like 90 FPS. Then they will take a prior frame and move it, like remap it. Even though it's a 2D frame, they'll remap it like in 3D space and reproject it to where like things need to be based on your head motion, and show you that. And it sounds crazy, but it turns out that like they can do that really quickly because it's kind of just like run a pixel shader, and it's like eerily convincing, like it kind of works. And so the demo Nvidia had was they had a demo where it was just a regular, like one of the older Oculus demos. You're in a room, you're looking around, whatever. But it was limited to 30 frames per second because to simulate a GPU limitation, and then and it really wasn't so detailed that it would be limited on the Titan X, but they were sort of showing. So without time warp at 30 frames per second, like it sucks. It's no good. Like you don't want that because it will make you kind of sick. It's not fun. It's not immersive. But then they flipped a switch and turned on time warp, and like had this sort of remapping thing going, and it got to be fluid. It looked pretty darn good. I mean, you could tell kind of that it wasn't perfect, but the image quality was awfully convincing, and it just was smooth all of a sudden. So it's like this black voodoo magic that they built in to stuff to allow more compelling graphics to happen in VR. Even if that means that you get this thing that sort of compensates if you can't achieve the frame rate that you need with the graphics hardware that you have. So that was cool. The other thing, they had a Crytek demo where you're like you play the part of a dinosaur that's just hatched, and then like this T-Rex comes up. I guess it's your mom or something. And anyway, it was a pretty cool thing because it was CryEngine based, and it was one of the higher fidelity things I've ever seen in VR. So that was neat. And the thing with that, Jordan, was you're standing up for it. It's actually not just seated, and there's like this mosquito that starts dive bombing you, and I got the like fight or flight response, like you get the chills and stuff, and like it pretty much got me. Like it was immersive enough that I was like freaking So,
wow.
And then the last demo was something that Oculus was apparently the only ones who could show this off in their booth. They had worked with Weta Digital and taken assets from the Hobbit movies to create this demo they called Thief in the Shadows. And basically you play the part of Bilbo in Smaug's lair, and you're inside the mountain, and the environment that you see, the VR environment around that you see, is like a little bit lower fidelity version of that gold-filled dragon's lair from the movie. And then like you move around a little, and then Smaug comes out, and they got Cumberbatch to voice this, or they used his voice, and
Wow.
like you have this high fidelity version of this dragon slithering around and all this. It wasn't interactive. You didn't get to do much, so it was maybe less fun than something that would be, but it was just super high quality graphics with super high quality assets, and it was a pretty cool like just projection of what you can do, what type of experiences you can create in VR. And all of that is a notch above the stuff that I've seen in past times. Every time one of these big shows comes up and I get my head inside of one of these headsets, what I see is better than what I saw, 6 months before or a year before.
Yeah.
They are progressing. And the amazing thing is, all the accounts that I've read about like what Sony's doing, what Valve's doing, etc., is that all three of them are really close now. Even Sony has pretty much like done a lot of catch up, and none of them have released a consumer product yet, which means nobody is putting out like the terrible thing that puts people off from VR. So I think everybody is kind of on the same page of, we're going to get this right, and when it goes out there, it's going to be good, so that it doesn't just become like a fad or a gimmick that goes away, but maybe has some staying power. So that was. I think they got their head screwed on straight about it. I hope that it all works out. I know Valve has said they're shipping Christmas this year.
Wow.
So it's all coming very soon. All right,
I think we talk about SSDs.
Yeah, let's. Geoff, you just finished this article.
The SSD endurance experiment. They're all dead.
Yes.
Finally.
So reset for us the SSD endurance experiment, because we've been doing this a while, right?
Yeah, since it basically about or I guess no, a year and a half ago, basically. We took 6 SSDs and decided how much data we could write to them before they burned out and kind of try to figure out what happens during that time. Do they slow down at all? Do they become less reliable at retaining data? And then sort of what happens when a drive actually runs out of flash, when it burns through, sort of the over provisioned area that it has and can't write data anymore. Do you lose what's on the drive? Does your computer explode? We just kind of wanted to see what would happen. So we took 6 SSDs and we just started writing data to them. We stopped every 100 terabytes and checked, all their health variables and ran a bunch of performance tests. And we just kept going until one by one the drives all kind of died. And the last one died, I guess, last week or maybe a week and a half ago. I was actually on vacation and out of the office when it happened. But the last sort of survivor was the Samsung 840 Pro, which wrote over 2.4 petabytes, which is
Was it
ridiculous.
was
I mean,
it
it's
was it alone when it died, or was there someone with it?
it, it was. Well, it sort of was and it wasn't, because when I came back, I sort of, I logged into the machine and everything was kind of frozen. But the drive was presumably at that point still accessible. It still showed up in the Windows Explorer, and then when I double clicked on it, Explorer hung, and like a second later, the Intel storage driver popped up a little message saying that it had been disconnected. So I think I technically got to watch its last gasp of breath before it died.
God, that's sad.
It is kind of, I feel kind of bad about this. We were not kind to these drives. They wrote way more data at a much higher rate than any reasonable consumer is gonna put them through. Which is good, because we learned that the modern SSDs have no problem surviving what we would consider a sort of a typical consumer workload. Most people are only going to write maybe a few terabytes per year. If you're a really heavy user, maybe you get into double digits per year. But all of these drives wrote hundreds of terabytes without any problems whatsoever. And most of them, I mean, the 840 Pro didn't have any problems really until the very end. So it wrote petabytes of data without a single error.
Wow, that's very cool.
And so, Geoff, we had a couple of like the. I think since the last update, were there two drives since the last update, or was there just one left?
There were two. I mean, one was sort of half left. We had two of Kingston's HyperX 3K drives. These are SandForce-based drives, so they have this DuraWrite compression scheme that compresses incoming data so that you use less of the flash, so in theory the drive lasts longer. So what we did was we took one of the drives and we tested it like all the other ones with incompressible data to sort of level the playing field. And that drive died around 700 terabytes, I think, 750. The other drive we tested with partially compressible data, and it ended up writing over 2 petabytes. And actually was, it sort of highlights the fact that there tends to be some variance from, NAND chip to NAND chip, and as a result, one SSD to the next. Because even if you take into account the fact that this drive wrote less data because it was compressing it as it came in, it still wrote twice as much as the other HyperX drive did before it died. So this is kind of a cherry drive. It's sort of like with a CPU, how some CPUs are more comfortable running at higher voltages and higher clock speeds than others, even if it's the same chip from the same, from the same wafer even. This is just one of those cases where this particular batch of NAND was, just really durable. We had hardly any reallocated sectors, hardly any programming and erase failures over the extent of the drive's life. This drive logged fewer flash failures than any other drive, sort of for the amount of data that it wrote. So it just ended up being one of those drives with really robust flash. It died kind of unexpectedly. We made it up to 2.1 petabytes. We did our usual performance check and health check at that time. Everything was fine. Rebooted the system, and the drive didn't appear. So it may have, I don't know, suffered a massive flash failure when the power cycled there, or something else happened with the drive, and that was it, and it was completely unresponsive. So that was at 2.1 petabytes. which left the Samsung 840 Pro as kind of the last SSD standing. And this is the only one that was actually problem-free right up to the very end. The HyperX drive had some uncorrectable errors around the petabyte mark, which is something that, that can compromise data, that can result in a system crash. So it's kind of, at that point, you would take a drive out of service, but we sort of let it continue on just to see how many writes it would take to kill it. The Samsung 840 Pro had not a single error the entire time. It was basically flawless, even though it actually lost a lot of flash to sort of normal wear and tear. By the end, it had reallocated over 7,000 sectors for almost 11 gigabytes of flash that it's sort of retired and deemed as no longer fit for use. But it still actually at that point had a bunch in reserve. I thought it would go past 2.5 petabytes and sort of into 2.7 if you sort of look at the decay rate that we've got in the story. But it failed unexpectedly, sort of like the 840 series did as well. There were no more warning messages. It just kind of stopped writing, disappeared from the system, and we weren't able to recover any data from it. So it was a sudden failure, one that we figured was going to happen eventually. But it kind of struck without warning, which is a little surprising that both of the Samsung drives did it. All the other ones provided plenty of warning messages. Sometimes they were a little bit premature. The drives had a lot of life left in them at that point. But even sort of right up to the very end, even Samsung's Magician utility, which is kind of its SSD utility for Windows that monitors health and lets you do various system optimizations. Even that utility said the drives were in good health, including the one that had posted hundreds of uncorrectable errors at that point. So the Samsung drives aren't as good based on what we've seen as sort of reporting the actual health of the drive. But they did last incredibly long.
So it's like, hey, everything's fine. Everybody else is dead, and everything's still fine. And
then it's not.
Then sudden heart attack, right?
Yeah. It's this kind of academic at this point too, because we didn't really run into these problems until after hundreds of terabytes of writes. These are all consumer grade drives that are really not designed. They're not spec'd to write more than a couple of hundred terabytes of writes. I mean, some of them, the Intel 335 series is only rated for, I think, 22 terabytes of writes, which still ends up being, I think, something like 20 gigs per day over the 3-year warranty length. So all of the problems that we ended up encountering, especially the sort of annoying bit where these drives are dying and they're not slipping into a read-only mode where you can actually recover data from them. Only a couple of drives actually did that. We're encountering these problems at the very, very edge of, what. It's hard to imagine a situation apart from just recording lots of raw 4K video where you would actually need to write this much data to a drive in sort of a non-enterprise or server environment.
Yeah. And yeah, they seem to basically be engineered for what you need and way more. So now let's talk real quick about performance, because I think there's a concern, at least potentially, as the drive ages and it burns through some of that reallocated spare area and stuff, the performance could change. So what did you see as these drives all aged?
A whole lot of nothing. That was one of the more interesting things, is that performance was really consistent across the length of the experiment. There were a couple of outliers if you look at the graphs, a couple of instances and a couple of tests where the drives were a little bit slower. But then they would all bounce back for the most part. I mean, remarkably consistent performance, not only in sort of the targeted benchmarks that we ran every 100 terabytes, but the speed at which the drives were able to write all the data that we were sort of loading up sort of in between those benchmarking sessions. Even the 840 Pro, which had really inconsistent write speeds from one batch of writes to the next, was consistently inconsistent in that behavior. So if you look at the graph, it kind of has this thicker line where it's oscillating back and forth, and it did that basically for its entire life. So the behavior of all the drives was reasonably consistent for the length of the experiment. Cells do actually become more difficult to program and to read from as they age, But part of the reason why blocks are reallocated, even though there isn't a sector failure, is because they'll get to a point where the drive just decides that it's too much trouble, it's too slow to access that sector, so let's replace it with something fresh. So I think that's why we didn't see really much of a performance slowdown over time. You can see it in a couple of instances, especially with the Corsair Neutron GTX in the actual sort of endurance portion of the write speed test we did, and that's only a slowdown right as the drive was dying. It sort of slowed down leading up to that final death over the last, few terabytes probably.
Yeah. So we had 6 different drives, right? And there were 6 different drives, different brands, right? That's not a ton of samples. So let's talk about just like the actual result, if there is one, of an experiment like this where we're really kind of limited on what we sample.
Well, yeah, I mean, we had 2 examples of the HyperX and only 1 each of all the other drives. So you can't really make any manufacturer or model specific assessments. I mean, the fact that both Samsung drives didn't have warnings, that seems to be maybe a manufacturer specific thing, just because of their software is not keying in on certain variables to assess the health of the drive. But apart from that, we can't really make any judgments based on the individual manufacturers or drives. But because we had 6 drives and they all very, very easily made it past, 300 terabytes of writes without problems, that's sort of a situation where I'm comfortable saying that, modern SSDs for the average user with an average write load, you're not going to see any problems. I think the fact that all 6 drives, the fact that they were also from 6 manufacturers, 6 different models, and they all did just fine for anything that sort of approaches a reasonable workload for a consumer drive, I think means that we can have a reasonable level of confidence in sort of the modern SSDs that are out there right now. Whether or not, every drive off the shelf is going to make it past a petabyte or 2 petabytes like some of these drives did, I think that the chances are good that there are a bunch of drives out there that will last this long. We had 3 drives. Half of the drives made it past a petabyte, which is, not something I'd put money on if you gave me a stack of SSDs and asked me which one was going to last the longest. But I think it's safe to assume that a lot of these consumer drives can last a lot longer than the manufacturer specifications promise.
So I understand you're going to be doing a vocal performance now.
No, I don't have a voice for singing, but I did kind of have to sneak a little something special at the end of the article. It was sort of
Jordan can sing
I had
this.
a few lines in my head as I was doing testing in the final
Is there a
weeks, and it
melody
turned
that was
into
supposed to go
something
with
bigger.
this?
Oh yes.
I see.
I
It's
Will
a Gloria
Survive.
Gaynor cover.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So Jordan, if you want to warm up for a minute, that's fine, and then you can just go ahead.
Wow, you really did write a song. I'm looking at this. This is multiple verses and codas. I mean, this is impressive.
Now I hear the cake version.
I
Jeff.
wouldn't go so far as calling it impressive, but
I hear the
it
cake
helped pass
version
the
of
time.
this.
Now,
when
is the idea, Scott, in the fantasy in your head of how this is supposed to play out, that I would sing it in a falsetto?
I think it's totally optional, Jordan, because that would work. But like I was telling you, when I hear that Geoff wrote this, I hear the Cake version of this song. Have you heard Cake's version of this, which is very,
No.
very different, because they don't like melodies not allowed. They're just different. And,
At first, I don't know Cake very well.
no, they're great. Like I really like what they did with this song, but
I see.
but that's what I hear. So hey, your interpretation is your interpretation. I don't think we're gonna get one.
Yeah, I don't know if I have
We
the.
maybe should have given them a little bit of
We
warning.
probably, but that would have been nice. I don't want to be nice, So that's
I
okay.
think I'm most impressed with this chorus of "Oh no, not I will survive as long as I know how to write. I know I'll still stay alive. I've got all myself to give, and a persistent will to live." Man, that's heavy stuff.
He spent some time on this. Maybe the nerdiest thing I've ever
And
seen
now
in my
you
life.
see me.
Just
Now
maybe.
you see me as somebody new. I'm not that chaste, naive virgin trying to prove something to you. Okay, that's okay. Because I took all your best shots without a single error shown. You know I've written way more data than all you have ever known. Go on now, watch the gigs pile up. more senseless random files just to see if I'll get stuck. Smart Money says I've got the miles in the tank. I ain't gonna stop. This is Biggie Smalls. I ain't gonna stop now. And you can take that to the bank. Wow. And then it fades out. Dun, dun, diddle, 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 da. Yeah, that's good times. But no, I'm not gonna take the bait. Thanks though.
Yeah, it's worth a shot, you know.
Yeah, maybe I'll work
auto-tuning
on
in the
a piano
post-edit.
rendition. Yeah, maybe I'll get the piano warmed up over here, and I could do a little. We'll do a little more of an official version for the podcast only version or something. Maybe I don't know. I'll see how drunk I get this weekend. Okay, guys, I think that with that death of 6 SSDs, we can say this episode is coming to a close. What do you think?
I think we're good.
I know
Sounds
there's
fair to me.
always more questions to answer.
Are we missing some important? Let me look through the questions in the chat, because some of these
That was
questions, Jordan.
not a cue for find more questions
Some
for
of
us
them
to
are
answer.
Yeah, but
That
some of
was-
these questions are like completely full of it, and we're not going to answer that. And they're funny or whatever, but they're not actually serious.
Find punk users' question and don't answer it.
Yeah,
Okay,
we already
good.
passed over that, so that's not happening. That's an inside joke, by the way. So anyway, anything solid or rumored about from AMD about the R9 390X? I saw a computer sitting in the corner of a booth that an AMD guy pointed to and said, "There's an R9 390X in there," and then like nothing else happened. So it's like I was in the same room with one, but I didn't even like like they were doing a VR demo on it, and they were like, "Yeah, we don't have time for that. You have to leave because the next guy's coming." So I just left. So I haven't. I don't know what to tell you. When does TR staff thinks we'll see a big move off SATA SSDs and on a mass adoption of PCIe-based storage? August. Did you see any DirectX 12 demos at the convention center? I know Epic said they had PCs with DX12 ready for anyone with U4. Yeah, but they were all early days stuff that I saw, which was like the Oxide demo that they also had on Mantle and Vulcan. You think there's any way the GTX 4 gig GTX 960 comes in at $199 and the 2 gig version gets shuffled down in price? Like if the bottom drops out of the US dollar, probably not. Otherwise, maybe in the future, like
300 series refresh.
yeah, but not just because. They are going to have a problem there, though. We talked about it in our post today. There are 4 gig versions of the GTX 960 coming out. Presumably, they're going to cost more than the around $210 like high clock versions of the 960. And then you're into the price of like an R9 290, which is way more powerful and has 4 gigs too. So, I don't know, man. That's going to be a weird thing. Everybody was calling for that when the product came out, and they're going to release it, and everybody's going to look at it and go, "Yeah, not for that price." So, I think it would be great. It would be a great thing if it came out at $199. I just don't think it's going to happen.
Excellent.
Jordan, sorry, I just felt like people ask
No,
questions.
it's okay.
We should get them in.
All right.
So,
You're
Okay.
also wrong about
Bef-
PCIe SSDs, but
is it not August? Was I too optimistic?
that's way too much. Well, he's talking about a big move. I don't know. A big move.
When
is
does
gonna
it
happen when
start?
People actually need faster drives.
Okay,
it'll
well-
start probably when Skylake comes out and Intel has a drive that it wants to pair with that platform.
August.
But there's not a lot of incentive for drive makers to put a lot, I don't think, in PCI Express while you have so many people who have SATA compatible systems who are still buying drives. So a big move, a big shift between the two probably isn't going to happen for a while, but high performance and sort of enthusiast oriented stuff is sort of trickling out now, and I think it accelerates a lot when Skylake arrives.
Good stuff isn't here yet. So yeah. Anyway,
Alrighty, well, before we go, a big shout out to our sponsor for this episode, MSI. Be sure to check out, and this will be in the show notes as far as a link, but check out the AG270, that super sexy 3K all-in-one gaming desktop with that GTX 970, 6GB GDDR5 graphic GPU, Core i7 processing. This thing is pretty sweet. So more information in our show notes when that gets posted, and also, of course, you can just head over to msi.com, take a look at the G270. So thanks to MSI for being a partner for the podcast. That is it, folks. We're going to wrap this puppy up. We'll see you on the next show All of our Twitter handles are in the show notes. Everything else you can find at techreport.com. I'm Jordan Drake for the team, the dwindling team with the Tech Report. Saying for, Cyril could have the decency to tell me the last episode was going to be his last. I'm going to have to call him about that.
Didn't get a chance to say goodbye properly.
I there's a closure issue here that it's just going to plague me for hours.
We can have him on. I think he'd just like give us all the finger and then like be like peace out and then that'd be it. But
come on,
if you want to do that, like
no, it'd be fine. He'd come on just totally naked, just be like, "What's up?" It would be a whole side of Cyril we've never seen. Okay.
I don't think we can top that.
No, you can't top that. Everyone want me to sing, but I think I just did I think you got a taste of how that could go. So that could go anywhere.
Yeah, we're not asking that again.
No, we're definitely not. Okay, for the rest of the team of the Tech Report, for the Tech Report podcast, I am Jordan Drake saying so long.